Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show about all things writing, including author interviews, hints, tips, and story readings. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Let's get joined up.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 58 today, and today's chat is with Angela Ackerman, co-author of the brilliant writing reference book The Emotion Thesaurus and the whole Thesaurus series in general, covering everything from setting to texture in your fiction. Had a great chat with Angela, speaking all the way from Canada, so you might hear a couple of things in the connection. I tried my best to clear up the signal, but hopefully you'll bear with us because there's some great content in there. She's full of insight and interesting writing advice, so stay tuned for that. We'll also have some tweets of the week and this week's Book Bloggers Corner review, which comes courtesy of Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac. Just wanted to say thanks for the excellent response we've had to the relaunch. No one has openly ridiculed me for the new show jingle yet, which is a bonus. Also, thanks to everyone who's been sharing the show on Twitter and spreading the word about Book Bloggers Corner. A few special mentions go to Maria Smith, Helen Laycock, Edwin Downward, Dave Hardy, Donna Marie McCarthy, Cleo Bannister, Neil May and Mickey Crocker. As ever, I'd encourage any of you to get in touch to let us know what you think of the show, ask any questions you might have, suggest guests, or fire any other random thoughts our way, and I'll be sure to give you a mention. Speaking of which, Chris Strub, or Strub, S-T-R-U-B, tweeted to let us know about his project, 50 States, 100 Days, the book. Equipped with a GoPro, a selfie stick, an iPhone and a dream, Chris travelled solo to all corners of the US to weave together the story of how he visited youth organisations in all 50 states. It sounds really interesting. So follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Strub, that's Chris S-T-R-U-B, and find his book on Amazon. Thanks for getting in touch, Chris. So a bit of a quick catch up from me before we dive into Angela's interview. For those of you new to the show, I'm in the midst of writing a crime novel. Working title is Safe Hands, about an ageing safecracker who, for the sake of his dying wife and a son that hates his guts, has come out of hiding for one last job in a rundown seaside town, Skeggy, for those of you from the UK, Skegness. I'm pleased to say I've just given birth to a very ugly first draft, and now I'm about to begin the dreaded edit. And I actually formatted the book for my Kindle and read the whole thing on holiday, ready for the rewrite. So my first task is going to be to get the structure right, and I find that K.M. Weiland's book on outlining your novel is really helpful with that. So I've been getting lots of tips from that. I recommend that if you haven't come across it before. I'll let you know how I get on, but I'd love to hear how your writing projects are going. Have you got any editing tips you want to share with me? Let me know. You can tweet me at JU Podcast or on my personal profile at Mr. Kelly2U, or drop us a line on Facebook. That would be great. Right, that's quite enough of me droning on. Let's get on to this week's guest, Angela Ackerman. Angela is a best-selling author, writing coach and international speaker. Her unique Thesaurus books are available in multiple languages, are sourced by universities and used by novelists, screenwriters, editors, psychologists around the world. Angela also co-founded the popular Writers Helping Writers site, which is a hub for writers to hone their craft, as well as the One Stop for Writers, an innovative online library filled with unique tools, resources and a massive description database to help writers elevate their storytelling. Yeah, so it was great to speak to Angela, and I hope you enjoy the chat as much as I did. Well, hi Angela, thanks for joining us on Joined Up Writing, and I know it's quite a long way. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are, and why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your own writing journey, you know, where you got to how you got to where you are today, so to speak.
Sure thing. Well, first of all, I'm Canadian, so I live in Canada. I am just outside a small town, well, not a small town, a big city, but it's called Calgary, Alberta. And it's right by the Rocky Mountains. So I have a beautiful mountain view at my house, which is really nice. How I started writing was a long time ago, much like everyone else who starts down this path. You look at your writing and you think, hey, this is pretty good. I think I can do this. I think I can do a better job than some of the books that I read, and I very quickly learned by joining a critique group that my writing was not as strong as I thought it was. This was 2003, I think, 2004, somewhere around there. I joined a group called the Critique Circle online. And that's actually where I met Becca, who is my co-author for all my books. And we just, we really hit it off. We really loved the work that each other wrote. We both write the same type of fiction, which is middle grade and young adult fiction. So, it just became this great friendship that we had. And I learned a ton there. I really evolved my writing quite a bit. And, I went down the traditional path. I got an agent. That agent didn't work out. I got another agent. I went to acquisitions a few times with one book in particular, but unfortunately, I just wasn't able to place it. And in the meantime, doing all of this, I was constantly learning and growing my craft. And so Becca and we decided that we wanted to share some of these things that we were learning with other people. And we had started up a blog. Back then, it was called the Bookshelf Muse. And we were just sharing some of the insights that we had figured out along the way. And one particular area where we really struggled was showing character emotion in a way that was compelling, that wasn't relying on all these crutch gestures where our characters were always rolling their eyes and shrugging their shoulders and things like that. And so we started building these lists of different types of body language, thought processes, and internal sensations that characters would have for every particular emotion that they might experience. And what we discovered very quickly was that we were not alone in this area of struggle. So many people struggled in this area, and the blog became very popular very quickly because of these lists. So eventually we decided to start publishing these books, and we kind of moved on from the emotion thesaurus onto other topics of description. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to here.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, as I've mentioned to you before, I use the emotion thesaurus myself, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that a bit later on. We'll just take a bit of a step back. So, why do you think you started writing in the first place? Was it something that was it something that was kind of struck you as a passion from being a child, or what drives you to write in general? Would you say?
I have always loved writing. I think a lot of writers come from a background where when they were younger or kids, they would write a lot. I did. And for me, it's kind of twofold. First of all, I really am passionate about connecting with people. And I think books are a very special medium where you can have intimate conversation with somebody through your character. So I very much, communication is a big part of why I do what I do. I also really enjoy helping people. And so that blends especially well with the nonfiction that I write. I'm able to help other writers so that they can, reach their dreams, and they can publish their books, and they can get them in the hands of other readers. And for me, like it's blending these two things together, being able to help people and being able to communicate and have a conversation. And especially with fiction, I see writing as a way to tell people, let them know that there's someone out there that understands them, that they're not alone, whatever they're experiencing. And through the scope of the character's growth, that they are possibly stronger than they realize, that everyone goes through hardships and challenges, and hopefully they see through the character's evolution that, they can kind of go through the same thing themselves. And so I guess maybe that's very idealistic of me, but that's sort of how I view writing fiction.
Yeah, that's great. Well, there's nothing wrong with having aspirations like that. That's what kind of drives you. What was it? Would you say which writers kind of inspired you, or still inspire you now? What sorts of things do you like to read? Are there particular authors that you particularly admire their style or their approach?
Oh wow, that is like a loaded question. That's a Rosemary's Baby question right there. Oh boy, I mean, I have varied interest in reading. I quite enjoy sagas like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. I've read that series I don't know how many times. I don't think I could ever write like that, but it's just something that it's so in depth and just so incredibly real, well characterized characters. It's amazing to me. So I very much enjoy his work. I like Stephen King.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, his work has really evolved over time. He used to be very much slash and dash horror, but the more you read of his books, the more you see how they're interwoven with each other in a way that is just, it's actually quite amazing what he's done if you read the whole body of work. I also really enjoyed, the Divergent series, Hunger Games. I really do like a lot of dystopian fiction, even though that's falling out of favor. So yeah, things like that.
That's good. Well, you say it's falling out of favor, but fads come and go, don't they? Do you tend to? I mean, obviously, with non-fiction, it's probably a little bit different. I suppose to a certain extent, you'd need to write to a market or to a need that you perceive that's out there. But with your fiction, are you a person that, would you say, kind of follows your heart more than your head? If you've got an idea and something that you want to write, just go ahead and write it. Or how much does that kind of affect what you write, would you say?
I definitely don't write for the market. I will get an idea and it just sends me down, the rabbit hole, and I'll just follow it. So I don't necessarily write for the market, but I do, I draw from the market. I see, what other people are doing. I pay attention to how it's delivered and things like that. But at the end of the day, I'm out to write a compelling story, and it doesn't necessarily follow trends or anything like that.
And what about, how do you approach it from a point of view? Are you very big on structure? Do you have to get the framework and everything in place before you get started? Or do you just, like you say, you've got an idea and you just off you go and see where it leads you?
Well, it's funny. When I started writing, I was very much a pantser. I would just, I would plan a little bit. I'd have a notebook. I would fill it out with ideas and little tidbits of my characters' personality and what was driving them and things like that. But as I've evolved as a writer, I have gained an incredible appreciation for structure and the importance of structure. I think that a lot of pantsers probably actually follow structure, but they do so unconsciously. The ones who are really good at it, the ones who are still developing, I think it ends in a lot of revision, because you really do need to structure it. But if you're doing it after the fact, it's absolutely something you can do. It's just going to require a little bit more work. But I would say that now, when I write now, I definitely plan more. I always really dig into my character's past, because the most important thing about the story, it's not all the cool things that your character's going to do throughout the story. It's why they're doing it. It's conveying to the characters what's driving them. That's really at the heart of the matter. That's what separates, one story from a million others. And that's really what readers want to know, is they're looking for that connection. They want to see how a character is, why they want what they want, what's pushing them to achieve something. What are their desires, their hopes? What are their fears? And so I really try to dig deep into who my character is, to understand them, so that when I write the story, I'm writing their behavior, their decisions, everything lines up with who they are deep down and what they want. And in this way, I'm finding, by doing that and adhering to a little bit more of a structure model, I'm writing my stories are a lot stronger out the gate. And so there is less revision. There's always a lot of revision in my case, because I'm a very slow writer, and I'm kind of a perfectionist. But I do find that by having more structure, I am really kind of cutting out a few different revisions for sure.
I mean, you mentioned there that you're quite a slow writer and you're a bit of a perfectionist. Are you a writer, would you say, that tends to edit as you go along, or do you try to resist that?
I try to resist it. Occasionally, I mean, what I find when I'm writing fiction, what I find is helpful is I will kind of go back a little bit and read what I had written before, and just to kind of get back into the flow. And sometimes you'll spot something and you're like, oh, I got to fix that. Or sometimes I'll come up with an idea on the fly and I realize that it's going to impact something that happened before. So I may choose to go back, fix that thing, just very rudimentary, so that, it all the dots still line up. But for the most part, I try not to edit. One technique that I'll use to sort of stay in the writing flow is I'll stop halfway through a scene, or I'll stop knowing exactly where things are going to go next, so that when I come back to writing, I don't need to go back. Instead, I can just keep on writing, even if it's like halfway through a sentence. You finish the sentence, suddenly you're not staring at the page, you're actually writing, your hands are on the keyboard, muscle memory takes over, and you hopefully go from there.
I agree. That's something that I've tried as well. That's really good. It's difficult to do sometimes because I am one sometimes, depending on how much time I've got to write, I'll get to the end of a chapter and it feels nice because you've reached the end of the chapter and it's kind of satisfying, and you stop. And the next time you go to pick up where you left off, it's so difficult because you're starting from that fresh chapter and you're thinking, right, where was I? Where's the story going to go? You know, and it's just, like you say, it's just quite difficult to get back into it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you so you talked about, or you mentioned briefly that the Thesaurus project, however you want to call it, the books that you put out, you co-wrote those with Becca Puglisi. Give me a bit of a sense of kind of how you work together. Is it a case you work independently, and then you come together and say, well, I've done this and I've done this, or do you kind of split up tasks? Tell me a little bit about how that works.
Well, I'm very lucky because Becca is very much the opposite of me in all the ways that I'm weak, she's strong. And so one of those is I'm more like, the creative, come up with ideas, crazy stuff, a little bit of, like I said, like a cat following a laser dot across the room. I can be like that. And it comes out well because it's very creative, and, I can come up with some creative stuff. But at the same time, you need somebody to keep you grounded, organize, take care of the details, all that kind of stuff. And Becca is so good at that and keeping us on task. So typically what we will do is, first of all, we'll plan whatever book we're going to write next. And what we've always done to date is we actually explore each descriptive thesaurus idea, whether or not it's emotions or positive traits, negative traits, setting, skills and talents. We have 13 different ones. We'll explore it on our blog first, and so we'll write entries on the blog. But when we're ready to put it into a book, then we have to, get down to the structure. We need to figure out what the entries are going to look like so that they fit on a book format, because the format of a book is going to be different than what you can do online. And we decide, okay, what entries are missing? What areas do we want to cover that we haven't covered yet? And so we'll make a list, and then we kind of split that list in half, and we each will, write the entries. And then we will turn to we call it the front matter. So all the teaching content that goes with any book. So with the Emotion Thesaurus, teaching writers how to show, not tell, and, how to avoid things like melodrama, all that kind of stuff. And we'll really kind of do a strong outline on what we want to cover for each book, what areas we think will be really helpful for writers. And once that's all organized, we split it in half again. And she writes half, I write half. Then we swap and we edit. And our styles are similar, but I think because we each write half and then we're editing each other's half, and then we're kind of rejigging the order because perhaps there's something that she touched on in a section that I've also touched on, and so we need to decide where it's going to go. The end result is something that's seamless. Like, I don't think someone could look at our book and go, oh, this entry Becca wrote, and that entry Angela wrote. Like, it's very cohesive, and it's a great relationship, and it works really well. And we do this with everything. We do this with all our books. We do this with our business plans, because Becca and I have a couple of businesses together, writing businesses, and our marketing initiatives and things like that. We go through everything, we plan it, and then we set a schedule and we just get to work. And she lives in New York. I live, like I said, in Canada here. So it's not like we can see each other every day. We often will Skype online to kind of go over stuff. But other than that, we use email and just work independently. It's perfect. It's great.
It's a real strong partnership that you've got there then.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, you've kind of touched on it, but obviously the business side of things, because your books, you are putting these books out yourself. They're independent. I'm guessing they're independently published. So you had to learn that whole side of things, the business side of things. How did you go about that? Was it just something, had either of you got any experience of that, or did you just treat it like any other, business venture? Tell me a little bit about that, because that is obviously, especially when you kind of started doing it, presumably was a little while ago, and it was still a bit of a brave new world, and, there's lots of things developing.
Yeah, it was very terrifying when we started, because we do self-publish. And when we self-published The Emotion Thesaurus, which was our first book, it was 2012. And 2012 is an important year because self-publishing was, more common, but the traditional industry still kind of really turned their nose up at it. Mm-hmm. And, the acceptance level wasn't there yet. And why that's especially important in Becca and my case is because we were putting out a book on how to write that would sit alongside other books that were all traditionally published and published by editors and agents and New York Times bestselling authors. Mm-hmm. And then there's Becca and I, who, we're not published. We aren't editors. We just have this subject that we're really passionate about, and we want to share it with other people. And so it was very intimidating that, to just go ahead and do this. But we knew we had to do it because our content was being pirated by people. We were contacted by a writers association in Florida who wanted us to come speak because someone had given the organizer a PDF of basically all our blog content on the Emotion Thesaurus.
Right.
And so that's how we discovered that, we need to do something with this, or somebody else is just going to take it and run with it. So yeah, it was, we had to teach ourselves a lot about how to self-publish well, and how to make sure that we are putting out a really strong quality product, so that we don't have the credibility of being editors or being published authors, but this book holds a lot of value. And what we saw is once people started to read it, the biggest question we got is, where's this been all my life? So it really did fill a need for people.
Well, yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I'm holding a copy of the Emotion Thesaurus at the moment, and it's. I mean, I would say this because I'm speaking to the author, but it is really well put together. And I'll be completely honest. When I first saw it, I mean, I'm often, as a lot of people are, there are so many writing books and things, and sometimes you're a little bit suspicious of certain ones. There's so many. Some are good and some are not so good. And when I first saw it, I kind of thought, well, this kind of just seems... This is before I read it, I have to say. I thought, well, this just seems like a bit of a cheat. And is it going to be, a replacement for thinking about things and writing in a certain way? But it really isn't. And I think you describe, I think it's on the back somewhere, it says, give your imagination a boost. And that is really true. I mean, as an example, so for listeners, so for example, the way that it works, so I'll turn to an emotion. So in this case, it's determination. And so you've got a definition, just as you would in a normal dictionary or a thesaurus, and it says firm intention on achieving a goal, decisiveness. And then you list all the physical signals. So that's things like being the first to speak, or mirroring the leader's movements, or forming hands into a steeple, curt nod. It goes on. There's a great big long list. Again, not just what you would think of as, cliched things that probably are the first things that you think of when you're in the flash of first draft, say, for example. Well, then you go on and you've got internal sensations. So that's things like a fluttery feeling in the chest, increased internal temperature and heartbeat, muscle tightening and readiness. But then you've also got mental responses, so that's kind of the thought processes that are going on there. So things like planning for obstacles and strategizing ways to overcome them, dismissing negative thoughts, setting goals. And then it carries on, and it's cues of acute or long-term determination. So that's kind of future, that's kind of projecting into the future. So things like conditioning for the task in advance, or muscle clenching along the jawline, headaches, muscle strain. And what I thought was really good is how you've kind of linked a bit like a dictionary or anything else. It links off to other pages. So may escalate to hopefulness, and that's page 88, or confidence. And obviously you can go off there and it kind of spins you off into these distant things. And then you've got the opposite of that. So suppressed determination and things like feigning disinterest, shrugging, yawning. And then to finish the section off, there's then a kind of generic, sort of a general writer's tip. So, for example, on this section, it's never underestimate the power of texture. The way an object feels against the skin can create a powerful reaction, positive or negative, and add to the reader's emotional experience. So, there's loads and loads of different emotions in here, all spinning off to one another, and it's really, really useful. Because I probably like a lot of writers, as I say, especially when you're in the heat of the first draft. If you're writing a character that might be scared or they're dreading something or whatever, you do fall back on the kind of tried and trusted cliches. Obviously, and that's something that you have to sort out in the edit. You think, he felt sick or whatever, and that's okay. It might be accurate, but you need other things as well, because otherwise I think it does get a bit hackneyed.
Well, and the big thing too is taking these ideas and making them tailored to your protagonist or character, whoever you're describing, because these are specifically cut to the bone, so that they can be adapted to any character. How your character shows fear is going to be very different than how my character shows fear, and so the idea of having these lists of body language and the way your mind goes off on tangents and stuff like that when you're experiencing a specific emotion, and the internal sensations, it kind of just triggers that brainstorming function. We do tend to redo the same sort of crutch gestures over and over when we're in that first draft. But that's fine for first draft. But once we really, want to elevate it, we need to start thinking a little bit more unique. We need to paint a picture for the readers. We want to do something, write it in a way that fits their personality type, fits their emotional range, and is really compelling, something that creates a concrete image, but isn't the same old, same old. And I think a lot of people, they do get stuck on one thing. They'll focus too much on what the character's thinking, or they'll focus too much on visceral sensations and not enough on other things that are happening, like the character's actions and things like that. And so this is kind of just, like I said, it serves as a brainstorming center, so that you look at a list, you read it until an idea hits, and then boom, you just start to write it out, whatever that looks like. So that was kind of our intent behind the Emotion Thesaurus. And it really is out of all our books, it's definitely the one that has done the best. And, we hear again and again, we've heard from people who have said, it does seem like a cheat. It's not at all surprising that you've said that. A lot of people are like, I don't need that. That's a cheat. I need to just, focus and figure this out myself. But it really is just a brainstorming tool. That's all. It's not meant as a cut or paste tool or anything like that.
No, and as I say, it really isn't. And as you say, you can visualize your character. And a lot of the time, as you go down the list or you look at things, you obviously discount a lot of things. As you say, well, no, my character wouldn't do that. They wouldn't show it like that, or they would, or just the fact that, well, actually, they'd be trying to suppress it, and what might that look like?
Absolutely.
So that's really, really useful, because again, that isn't always easy to do, and we do fall into the just saying, well, he was scared or he was determined or whatever it might be, rather than showing that. So I think that's really useful. And I think it'd actually be quite useful to people who use writing screenplays as well, the same sort of thing, because you want to come up with ways that you can show that emotion, and you can show that through what they do and how they approach things. So I thought it was it's really, really useful. And as I say, I've used it a lot, and a little bit later on we'll talk about some of the other ones as well. But before we carry on, I just wanted to take a little break to do our tweet of the week. And I've just got a couple this week. So the first one was just a bit of a giggle, really, and it was from KM Wyland. And it's actually a picture of the king from Shrek. And it says, above this picture, it says, authors, when writing their books. And the quote is, some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make. And I think that's pretty accurate. I think a lot of us, when we're writing, particularly a first draft, you enjoy killing some of your characters off. So I thought that was quite good. And the other tweet was from Deborah Beale, which is at Mrs. Tad, but she retweeted a post from The Guardian, that was basically Jane Austen's lessons for creative writing students. And I will put a link to this in the show notes. But it's just talking a bit about how there's some kind of modern day exercises and examples that you can apply from Jane Austen's work. I mean, I think it specifically speaks about in the article about her book Persuasion. But in particular, it talks about dialogue, her use of dialogue, her brevity of description was really modern at the time. She's quite minimalist, much more minimalist than you would be led to believe, and her dialogue is really, really important. And I'm a big fan of dialogue. I think it's such a great way to move a story on, show character, and I'm just a really big fan of it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Angela, on dialogue. Have you been able to do much work with dialogue, or had much? Do you get many questions about dialogue?
Yeah, we definitely get questions about dialogue in terms of how do you show emotion through it. And I 100% agree that dialogue is really important. And it's one of those areas actually where writers can't really afford to not be good at it. Because if you look at the average novel, I mean, at least half the book, if not more, is going to be dialogue. Dialogue is action. So understanding how to say a lot or how to say things without saying anything at all, it really is an art form. I think that there's a great pairing with body language and dialogue. There's so many different ways that you can show emotion through dialogue by pairing the two. Your character can say one thing and then do something that's completely the opposite, which tells the readers that maybe they don't believe in what they're saying, or they're lying, or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And with anything, you want to show, not tell. I mean, you want your dialogue to mimic real world dialogue. And people don't tend to verbalize what they feel in terms of, really going in depth about how they feel, especially when you're dealing with characters who are damaged in some way, or they're a little bit mistrustful, which is pretty much most characters that we run into. They've got some backstory wounds that they need to work past, and it may make them a little bit distant from other characters. So you really have to find ways to show what they're feeling without being too direct. We don't rarely tell people, well, I'm really angry because of blah, blah, blah. Instead, you're going to show that anger through the words that you choose and your body language and things like that. So we really do need to be strong in dialogue, but especially with that emotional component, because everything needs to push the story forward, including the characters' emotions and the emotional progression.
Completely, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, on the subject, we talked a lot about your books, and we've kind of mentioned a little bit about your online stuff. I know your kind of main website is writinghelpingwriters.net. Tell us a little bit about that and kind of what you do with that. I know you do a lot of speaking as well. So tell us about how that website came about and kind of what people can find on there.
Well, a few years ago, like I said, when we started blogging, we had no idea what we were doing, but we just knew that we wanted to try to help other writers. So we started the Bookshelf News. And I think in 2015, we realized that what we were doing, people really were responding well to it, and we wanted to continue. So we decided, okay, you know what, it's time for us to grow up a little bit and rebrand ourselves. And Becca and I are two writers who help other writers. That's what we do. So we decided, let's make it official. Let's, redo our website. Let's move it. Let's trademark the name, and let's really embrace this. And so that's what we did, is rebranded ourselves, Writers Helping Writers. And, our website is packed with different articles that will help writers in all different areas, especially description, but also other problematic areas, like people struggle with things to do with marketing and things like that. And marketing is actually something that I enjoy doing, so anything that I learn there, I try to pass on. We also have a lot of different tools that we've created over the years, or lists, just helpful things that, writers can go and print out. We have them all on a page called Tools for Writers. And this page, it's full of PDFs that you can download, different handouts, different character profile sheets, or a way to plan your character's backstory. We have something called the reverse backstory tool, which is really popular. Mm-hmm. And just lots of different ways to help writers. We also have a second site called One Stop for Writers. And this is a site that we built about 18 months ago. Becca and I, along with Lee Powell, who is the creator of Scrivener for Windows and Linux. Mm-hmm. And One Stop for Writers is kind of a step up from Writers Helping Writers in that it's not the articles, but it's more tools for writers and more structural tools to help them write and progress a novel. And then also our complete collection of all of our different thesauruses, because we have 5 different books out right now, but we actually have 13 different thesauruses. And so those are all on this site, and they've been expanded and developed. And what we found is that we can help people a lot through our books, but we're kind of limited in some ways. And a website allows us to kind of explore more. What kind of tool do writers really need? Like, how can I build that? And the wonderful thing about having someone like Lee Powell, who's, a very talented developer, is Becca and I can come up with an idea for something, and then he can take it and turn it into reality. And so we're just helping writers in a different way through that website.
Okay, let's take a quick break there for this week's BBC Book Bloggers Corner. And this week's book review comes from Catherine Sunderland, otherwise known as Bibliomaniac. And she gives us a review of They All Fall Down by Tammy Cohen.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I'll start by just telling you the blurb on the back of the book. They say it's all in her head. She knows it's not. Hannah had a normal life, a loving husband, a good job, until she did something shocking. Now she's in a psychiatric clinic. It should be a safe place, but patients keep dying. The doctors say it's suicide. Hannah knows they're lying. Can she make anyone believe her before the killer strikes again? I don't know where to begin with this book, really. I just thought it was incredible. Tammy Cohen has a huge back catalogue already of books, and her most recent one was A Dangerous Crossing, which she wrote under Rachel Reese, which was a cosy crime. But actually, I have to say that I think this novel felt so accomplished and so polished and so fluent that it has to be, without a doubt, her best book so far. And I was completely blown away by it. The writing is absolutely faultless, and I was completely swept up in the narrative until the very, very last page. The premise is that there is a killer in a psychiatric clinic. So I thought this in itself was a huge hook and immediately had me interested in the story. I think it also immediately throws the reader into an atmosphere of tension, suspense and intrigue. But what really captured me was actually the prose, the writing itself. Cohen is really eloquent, and her writing is striking that you can't help but be consumed by the storyline. And her characters, you end up feeling compassionate for them and emotions for them, even though these are people in a psychiatric ward. They have issues, they're dysfunctional, they're broken, they're damaged, they're vulnerable. But you can't help but have an emotive response to them, which I think is really effective as well. This is a dark and intense read. It's got to be, because it's about psychiatric patients, but Cohen is an intelligent and thoughtful writer, and I think she struck a fine balance of weaving a great tale that explores families, relationships, heartbreak and guilt, alongside more deeper psychiatric issues. And nothing is trivialised for shock. There's good chilling characters, there's threatening twists and interwoven plot lines. I do think it's incredible, and I would highly recommend that you all gave it a go. So They All Fall Down was published by Transworld on the 13th of July this year.
Book Bloggers Corner.
So once again, that was a review of They All Fall Down by Tammy Cohen, given to us by Catherine over at bibliomaniacuk.co.uk. And you can follow Catherine on Twitter at Catherine Sunder, that's Sunde, 3, the number 3, as well as finding her on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're a book blogger yourself and you want us to feature one of your reviews, then be sure to let me know on Twitter or Facebook, because we'd love to have you on. Okay, let's get back to our chat with Angela, where I asked her a little bit more about that dreaded word, marketing. You mentioned marketing there, and that's something that you enjoy, which you're kind of in a minority with a lot of the guests that we get on here. They love writing and everything else, but they absolutely hate marketing. What would you say is kind of the biggest concern or the biggest gripe or one of the most common questions that you get asked around marketing?
Well, first of all, I'll clarify. I enjoy marketing. I hate promotion. And they're two very different things. And I'm terrible at promotion because I don't really like calling attention to myself. And that's typically what you do with promotion. But with marketing, the biggest thing that I get from people is, how do I get noticed? How do I find my readers? And what it really comes down to is understanding who your readers are. Every single book is unique. Fiction, nonfiction, it doesn't matter. It's going to have something about it that makes it special, something that sets it apart from any other book in its genre or even subgenre. And so really kind of understanding who your ideal audience is and understanding what special elements are within your book can really help you focus your marketing so that you're talking to those people specifically. Because a lot of people, what they do is they have this brand new shiny book and it's awesome, and what do I do with it? And so they go on Facebook and they join a couple groups and then they post a picture of it and then they leave and they don't interact with people. They're just hoping that people will trip on the cover and go, oh, wow, that looks like a good cover. I'm going to see what it's about. Mm-hmm. But the thing is when you market like that, it's like going fishing in an ocean, looking for tuna, but you have no idea where tuna are. You have no idea what bait to use to catch a tuna. Mm-hmm. You don't even know what kind of fishing line you need to catch a tuna. Mm-hmm. And so really understanding what makes a book special. If you had a romance book that it was a romance, but it was a specific romance around people who love dogs. So maybe it takes place with a veterinarian and maybe someone who works with dogs that have been abused or something like that. Mm-hmm. The aspect of this whole community around dogs and loving dogs and taking care of dogs, that's something that you could focus on when you go and try to market. You can think about, okay, so my romance readers aren't just people who read romance. Those could be people who like military romance. They could be people who like fantasy, romance or contemporary romance. My specific audience is people who love dogs. They have a special relationship with dogs. You can use that to find your audience online. Where do people hang out that are really passionate about dogs and they like talking about, different things to do with dogs? Find those spaces, find those forums, find the conversations that are happening on Twitter with these people. And then don't just flash your book cover, but actually start conversations, start connecting with these people, build relationships. Because this is the big thing that a lot of writers don't understand, is that marketing isn't about buy my book. Marketing is about understanding your audience, building genuine relationships with people, and providing them with whatever they need. So if that's entertainment, then entertain them. If that's information, then give them information. But figure out what it is that they find valuable, what they'll be interested in, and then provide it to them. So if you're in a group with people that are all, they're all dog lovers, and I would assume that the author of this book would be too, or they wouldn't have written this type of book, they should get involved in those conversations and not be worried so much about the whole, like, trying to push their book, but just simply enjoying this topic that everybody cares about. And eventually you build relationships with people, and they find out what you do, and they become interested in what you do, and they may read your book, and then they may become the very people that become your biggest fans, and they start telling everyone they know, you've got to read this book. So marketing it's not a short game, it's more of a longer game, in the sense that, you really have to be focused on why you write a book in the first place. Like I said, for me, I connect with people. I want to connect with people, and marketing is the same. Hopefully writers want to really connect with their readers. They're not just looking for, like, buy my book and then I'm going to forget about you and move on. You should try to focus on how you can build relationship with people who are interested in what you do. So I think that's the biggest problem that I see, is that people, they don't know how to market, they don't know what to do, but it mostly is rooted in the fact that they don't really understand who their exact audience is. And so they're trying things that aren't really tailored to that specific audience, if that makes sense.
It does. I think it's really good advice. And I think that's actually a good way to look at it, as I say, because a lot of writers don't like promotion, they don't like marketing. It's quite a nice way to look at it is, when you're writing the book, you're trying to connect with people, you're trying to move people, you're trying to reach out to them. And obviously, once you've written the book, you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to get it to that audience that you set out to write for in the first place. So if you think about it like that a little bit more, it might make it a little bit less onerous and a bit more of a pleasure to do it, or at least motivate you a little bit towards doing it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think the big thing is that most writers, like, let's face it, when we write a book, that's like only one piece of the puzzle. And we wear a lot of different hats, especially once you're published. You're thinking about the next book, you're maintaining your website, you've got a business, you've got a market, that you've got all these different things that you now have to juggle, and it can be completely overwhelming. So a lot of writers are looking for the shortcut. They're looking for the way where they can just do something quickly, and it's going to be wildly successful, and then all their dreams are going to come true. And unfortunately, this path is a lot of hard work. And with marketing, if you really are looking to build relationships with people, both your audience and then also influencers with your audience, so key people who have a really good reputation with that audience, who would be really good people for you to get to know, perhaps to build relationships with, so that you can do collaborative marketing, or you can go to them and ask for help or advice, and help them as well, kind of grow together. Finding those key influencers is also really important, and none of that happens it doesn't just land in your lap. You have to really think about it, and you have to put your time, you have to invest your time into other people, into helping them, and into building these relationships. And because writers juggle so much, and because they're always worried about time, a lot of people, they don't want to do that. They don't want to invest that time. And so they are looking for those shortcuts. And that's why our Twitter feeds are filled with book promotion, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. And it just becomes white noise. Nobody pays attention to it because there's just so much of it. And, it creates a big problem for everyone, because how do you break through that white noise when most of our readers are just really tired of being pitched to, which is a whole nother conversation. I don't want to go too far into marketing in this, but it's just, it is difficult, and it's really about changing your mindset and not being in a hurry and not trying to look for those shortcuts, and just understand that if something is worth doing, it's worth investing in.
Absolutely. Well, as you say, we could talk about that for hours, and I suspect there's lots and lots of that kind of information on the sites that you mentioned. So why don't you just remind everybody and just tell everybody where they can find your stuff online before we wrap up? So we mentioned Writers Helping Writers. So tell us about that, and also the other site that you mentioned, One Stop for Writers.
Well, Writers Helping Writers is writershelpingwriters.net. And as I said, it functions as our blog, so there's tons and tons of writing articles there. There's a page called Tools for Writers that has lots of different handouts, including ones on marketing and how to use different social media platforms, how to launch a book, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of character building tools and ways to tighten and revise your writing. So just visit that page, download everything on it, because hopefully you'll find it really useful. We also have One Stop for Writers, which is for people who really love our books and would like to see more of that. Having all of our thesauruses in one place makes it so much easier for writers, because they can access what they need and then get right back to writing. And then alongside with all of that, we have many different structure tools and different kind of planning tools to help different aspects, different elements of fiction as someone's building a book. So those are the two spaces where people can find me. And I'm also very social. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, you name it. So I'm very approachable. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them and help in any way I can.
And I'll make sure I put all those links in the show notes as well. And it's been really, really good to talk to you, Angela. So thanks for joining us all the way from Canada as well. And yeah, we are going to hang around and do a little bonus show for the epilogue, where we're going to be talking about one of the other thesauruses and giving a bit of a practical example. So you can look out for that when this gets released next week. But for now, Angela, thanks for joining us on Joined Up Writing.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, that pretty much wraps up this week's show. But before I go, I wanted to remind you that this is your show, so you need to let us know what you want to hear. We're looking to add more varied content and also open up to more collaborations like the book review segment on today's show. With that in mind, don't forget to get in touch if you want us to feature one of your book reviews, or maybe you know another blogger that might be interested in reaching a wider audience and trying something a bit different. I know some of you are a little bit shy, but just go for it. Feel the fear and do it anyway. The biggest favour you can do for us, I'm repeating myself again, I know, but is to share the show with at least one of your friends. Word of mouth is fantastic, but you can also subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you want to find your podcasts. iTunes in particular, it takes literally seconds to leave a quick review or a star rating, and it actually helps other people find the show, which would be brilliant. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at JU Podcast, on Facebook, Joined Up Writing Podcast, the web, joinedupwriting.co.uk. You can also look out for the epilogue show, which we tried out with Nathan O'Hagan's show recently, and that's gone down really, really well. That's just a added little bit of a show that's about 10 minutes long. That's an extra question with our guests each week. And this week with Angela Ackerman, I'm going to be actually giving a practical example of one of her Thesaurus books. So that's really interesting. So you want to check that out next week or whenever you happen to fall upon this podcast. You can find me on Twitter personally at Mr. Kelly to you. And that's pretty much it for this week. So thanks for listening to the Joined Up Writing Podcast. Let's get joined up. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy reading and writing, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up, right?